During the New Year's Eve party, my husband toasted the most incredible woman in my life. And it wasn't me. I always thought I knew the man I married. For over 20 years we built a life together, with love, complicity, and silent sacrifices. But on that New Year's Eve, in front of all our friends, he raised his glass and shattered everything I believed to be true. His words were like shrapnel, and the look he gave another woman was the final blow to the perfect image I held of our marriage. In that instant, something in me broke, but something new also began to be born. An intense and painful journey began, where I had to delve into silence, doubt, and shame to finally find the strength that had always existed within me. This is the story of a woman who got lost only to reinvent herself later with dignity, courage, and self-love. If you've ever felt your voice silenced, or your pain invisible, this story is for you. I am immensely grateful to have you here. I'm happy to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Golden lights danced through the crystal chandeliers as music filled the hall with vibrant energy. I watched everything from afar, a glass of champagne in my hand and a serene heart. It was a night to be thankful, to look back and feel proud of what I had built. Friends, family, laughter. Everything seemed in perfect harmony. For a moment, I felt that perhaps life was finally rewarding my silent dedication. Benjamin moved naturally, charming guests with his charismatic speech and practiced smile. I knew him too well to be swayed by appearances, but that night I allowed myself to relax. Lauren, my best friend since college, helped with the preparations and smiled as if she were also part of our family. Her presence always brought me a certain duality, comfort and unease, but I chose to ignore it. It was New Year's. It was a time for peace. Our son Samuel chatted with his cousins, laughing with a freedom I hadn't seen in months. That image, my family gathered, my home alive with life, was everything I had ever dreamed of. I sighed, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over me. Maybe, just maybe, this new year would mark a true new beginning. I was ready to live without hiding from myself. During the countdown, everyone gathered around the main table. Benjamin raised his glass with a strange sparkle in his eyes and asked for silence. I felt a pang of anxiety, but attributed it to the moment. I still believed that night would be light, full of good intentions and promises made from the heart. And even when he started speaking, I smiled, unaware that it would be my last true smile for a long time. I never imagined that night would become my worst nightmare. Benjamin looked around with that theatrical tone he used to use in business meetings. "Before we toast to the new year," he began, "I want to honor a special woman who has illuminated my life in ways no one will ever know." I was still smiling, suspecting nothing. I thought he would speak of me, of our almost 20-year marriage, of the battles won side by side. But then he turned his face and looked at Lauren. "To the most incredible woman in my life," he continued, "thank you for reminding me every day what it means to live with passion." His glass rose in her direction, not subtly but publicly, shamelessly. I felt my blood run cold. Lauren lowered her eyes for a second, then smiled, feigning shyness. The entire hall held its breath, but no one said a word. Not even me. I simply froze like a statue in the center of an earthquake. I looked around, expecting some reaction. Perhaps it was a misplaced joke, an unfortunate prank. But the silence that followed was more eloquent than any explanation. The guests' eyes avoided mine, as if my embarrassment were contagious. My fingers squeezed the glass tightly, and the glass seemed to vibrate with my accelerated pulse. It was impossible to understand what was happening. Or rather, it was impossible to admit that I already knew. The sensation was like falling from a tall building with nowhere to run. It wasn't just the implicit betrayal in the toast, but the fact that it was done there, in front of everyone. The public humiliation, the blatant disrespect, everything mixed within me like a suffocating fog. And Lauren, my trusted friend, returned his gaze with complicity, as if that exchange were old, as if I were the last to know. Everyone smiled except me. My world collapsed in silence. The party continued as if nothing had happened, as if that toast hadn't just torn the ground from beneath me. I smiled mechanically and took a sip of the champagne that now tasted of iron. I approached some guests, exchanged loose words, waved to those who looked at me with disguised pity. Deep down I heard nothing anymore. My mind echoed only one phrase. The most incredible woman in my life. Lauren avoided crossing my path, and Benjamin pretended everything was normal. I went to the bathroom and stared at my reflection for a few minutes. My eyes seemed empty, and something in me had died there. In that room decorated with golden balloons and false promises. I needed to resist at least for that night. I needed to pretend for me, for Samuel, for every part of me that still wanted to believe it was just a misunderstanding. Back in the living room, I clung to small gestures so as not to collapse. I touched Samuel's shoulder, who hadn't understood the gravity of the scene. I sat with an old couple of friends and listened to stories I barely registered. My mind floated, dissociated from the real pain. The night, which began with hope, now dragged on like a silent horror movie. I smiled with my face and screamed inside. When Benjamin tried to approach, changing the subject to trivialities, I just nodded and stepped back. My body already knew what my soul still reluctant to accept. Something had broken. It wasn't just the marriage. It was trust, self-esteem, the invisible structure that sustained my existence. The betrayal was there, alive, latent, disguised as charm and cowardice. And everyone was watching. The sound of applause seemed like a hum of betrayal in my ear. And so a new year began, with my heart in ruins. In the days that followed the party, Benjamin acted as if nothing had happened. He talked about work, commented on news, played with Samuel. All with the same naturalness as always. I, however, had become an actress without a defined role. I walked around the house performing routines, but my heart was numb. With each gesture of his, a doubt, a crack emerged. What else had been staged around me without me noticing? I opted for silence, not out of weakness but out of strategy. If he was capable of proclaiming his betrayal with a smile on his lips, I needed more than an impulsive confrontation. I began to observe him with different eyes, attentive, suspicious. I noticed that his phone was always face down, that he spent more time in the office than before, and that he avoided long touches or lingering glances with me. He no longer bothered to disguise the distance. Samuel seemed to notice something but avoided questions. Our silent connection was one of the few points of peace that remained. At night, when everyone slept, I walked to the kitchen and cried softly, not knowing if it was anger, sadness, or just exhaustion. A new cycle had begun, and I still didn't know what kind of woman I would need to be to get through it whole. But I knew the old Danielle no longer existed. Looking at him at the breakfast table, smiling as if the world were intact, I understood that I was dealing with someone who wore masks with mastery. My instinct told me there was much more behind that toast, and I needed to find out. So, even amidst mechanical kisses and empty conversations, I began to gather clues, like someone silently preparing an escape from their own home. He didn't know I had already started watching him. The unexpected happened on a rainy afternoon when Heather called me asking to talk. I found it strange, we were never close despite our indirect ties. We met in a discreet cafe, away from the neighborhood where everyone knew each other. She arrived with tired eyes and a heavy expression, like someone carrying a burden for too long. I still didn't know what to expect, but I felt deep down that I wouldn't leave that table the same woman. Heather took a while to start. She stirred her cup, averted her gaze until she finally whispered, "I can't stay silent anymore." I told her about the toast, about the look between Benjamin and Lauren. She nodded, unsurprised. And then, as if finally opening the floodgates of a dam, she revealed, "They're having an affair. For over 2 years." The world stopped. My hands trembled, but I remained still. I needed to hear everything. She told me about hidden meetings, invented trips, deleted messages. She said she tried to warn Lauren, tried to make her stop, but her sister always found a way to manipulate her. "She's always envied you, Danielle. You built what she never could." Each word was a needle pricked into my dignity. I didn't know whether to cry, to thank her, or just to get up and disappear from there. Deep down, that revelation only confirmed what my instinct had been screaming for days. But hearing it from Heather's mouth with rich detail and pain in her eyes was like falling off a cliff, already knowing the impact would be devastating. She held my hand and said firmly, "You're not crazy. You were betrayed. By the two people you trusted most. You deserve to know everything," she said, with eyes that also held pain. I drove home in silence. Driving through the wet streets, the city seemed to reflect my internal state. foggy, suffocating, suspended between the past and a new reality I didn't want to accept. Heather's words echoed in my mind, but I refused to absorb them completely. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she was exaggerating. Maybe I just wanted to keep believing the lie that kept me standing. Benjamin was waiting for me with dinner ready and a smile on his face. The scene would have been lovely in other times, but now it seemed like a poorly staged play. I sat at the table, ate in silence, answered questions with short phrases. He didn't notice, or pretended not to notice. My urge was to scream, to ask everything, to throw the plates on the floor. But I remained there, as if my soul had been torn out and replaced by an obedient puppet. That night I lay beside him, feeling the warmth of a body that no longer belonged to me. I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. I relived every moment of the party, every detail of the toast, every expression of Lauren. The pain was real, but it was still wrapped in a cloak of denial. Because to fully accept meant admitting that my marriage no longer existed. And I wasn't ready for that yet. I started writing in a notebook. Fragments of phrases, times, reactions. It wasn't madness, it was survival. I needed to gather evidence, stay lucid, control the chaos. I still didn't know what I would do with it, but I knew I couldn't trust anyone else. Not him. Not her. Not the image I had built of my own life. It wasn't time to act yet. But I wasn't sleeping anymore. They thought they were winning, but the war had just begun. Benjamin acted as if nothing had happened. He made coffee, asked about my day, complimented my dress, all with the same polished mask as always. But now I saw beyond. Every smile was a disguise, every touch a lie. It was like living with a mediocre actor on an improvised stage where the script no longer included me. And yet I smiled back, pretending I still believed. I started paying more attention to his schedule, the recurring delays, the poorly crafted excuses, the smell of a strange perfume on his shirt, the quick messages he typed with his body half turned away. He thought I was distracted, but it was exactly the opposite. I observed his every move like someone investigating enemy territory. And with each passing day my heart grew harder. Sometimes he tried to be affectionate, perhaps out of guilt or habit. I flinched subtly. My body no longer accepted that touch. Still I kept pretending. Because what I wanted now was more than the truth. I wanted proof, clarity, strength. Living together became a minefield. He laughed and I recorded it. He lied and I silently wrote it down. Living under the same roof was a daily exercise in resistance. There were no fights. There were no tears. Just a play where I already knew the ending. And his every word, every rehearsed gesture, was a painful reminder of how much I had been deceived. His every gesture wounded me with invisible cuts. Lauren kept coming to my house as if it were a neutral setting. She brought flowers, desserts, forced laughter. Benjamin feigned surprise at each visit, as if he didn't know she was coming. It was a grotesque play where everyone knew their role, except me until recently. Now I watched that performance with wide-open eyes and a churning stomach. She hugged me upon arrival. A false hug, damp with expensive perfume and rotten intentions. I returned it rigidly, struggling not to tremble. We exchanged polite phrases, youth memories, fake smiles. And all the while my chest burned with indignation. How could she? How did she have the nerve to come in here, smile at my son, sit at my table after everything? Between the lines I read the disguised competition. The glances she cast at Benjamin when she thought I wasn't looking. The stories she told about her unresolved affairs. As if they were harmless. With each of her visits my home became less mine. It was a stealthy invasion, as if she were already occupying the space that was once mine by right and love. I started avoiding being alone with her. I made excuses, invented commitments, sometimes went upstairs to my room before breakfast was even over. But when there was no escape I held firm, with my spine straight and my eyes watchful. I would not be destroyed without a fight. Not by her. Not anymore. She hugged me. And I almost vomited. At school my refuge had always been the teacher's lounge. There I could breathe. And it was there that Megan, a colleague and recent confidant, noticed my change. She didn't ask immediately. She just started sitting next to me more often, offering coffee, striking up light conversations. Her sensitivity reached me like a silent caress. One day between grading papers I broke down. Not with tears but with firm words laden with pain. I told her everything. The toast, the betrayal, Lauren's visit, Benjamin's silence. Megan didn't interrupt me. She just listened. Her tearful eyes said more than any comforting phrase. When I finished, she held my hand and said, "You are much stronger than you imagine." Since then, our conversations became deeper. I began to put into words what was once just internal turmoil. Talking to her was like opening a window in a dark room. Megan never tried to rush me or push me into decisions. She just listened and little by little helped to reorganize my soul into pieces. With her, I didn't have to pretend to be okay. In one of those conversations, she looked me in the eyes and said, "One day you will tell your story and inspire thousands of other women." At the time, I thought it was an exaggeration. I just wanted to survive that pain. But the phrase stayed with me, like a silent seed waiting for the right time to germinate. Megan said, "One day you will tell your story and inspire thousands." And perhaps that day was closer than I thought. Samuel left school early that Friday. He wanted to surprise his father and plan something special for their approaching wedding anniversary. He passed a new coffee shop near downtown and on impulse went in. It was the kind of place Benjamin usually liked. But what he saw inside would take something from him that no child should lose so soon: innocence before their parents. In the corner of the coffee shop, hidden behind a wooden partition, were Benjamin and Lauren, holding hands, laughing, and then kissing. A long, intimate kiss impossible to mistake. Samuel didn't need to look for long. He felt his stomach churn and his legs fail. He left there heartbroken, trying not to cry in public. His father, and Lauren. Everything was falling apart before his eyes. He arrived home pale, trembling. He hugged me tightly and I knew without words that something serious had happened. When I managed to calm him, he told me every detail. The words came out broken by sobs, but what he said was clear. My son had witnessed the confirmation of the betrayal. It was no longer speculation. It was fact. It was cruel. It was definitive. I held his face between my hands and said, "I'm so sorry, my love. None of this is your fault." But inside, a part of me screamed. They had crossed every line. And now it wasn't just me they were hurting, it was our son. And that changed everything. "I can't believe what I saw," he whispered with tearful eyes. Benjamin arrived shortly after sunset, smiling, as if the world still revolved around his own lie. Samuel stared at him from the living room doorway, with tearful but firm eyes. "We need to talk," he said with a sharp voice. Benjamin seemed confused at first, perhaps thinking he could charm his way out of the situation. But there was no escape. Samuel went straight to the point. He told what he saw, described the place, the gestures, the kiss. My husband's face paled. He tried to stammer justifications, ready-made phrases, pathetic denials. But Samuel didn't want to listen. "You destroyed everything. And you still had the nerve to smile when you arrived." Benjamin tried to approach, but my son took a step back. There was an invisible line between them, now impossible to cross. Trust was broken. And it was visible in the eyes of the boy who had always admired him. I watched the scene with a heavy heart, but without interfering. It was Samuel's moment, and he deserved to say what he needed to. When Benjamin tried to reach out, Samuel ignored it. "I don't want to hear your voice anymore," he said before leaving, going up the stairs with heavy steps. We stood there in silence. I on one side of the room, Benjamin on the other. Two strangers sharing the same roof. That night was long. The sound of muffled tears in my son's room hurt more than any argument. I knew he was processing the impossible, and I just wished I had been able to protect him from this. But now it was too late. "I don't want to hear your voice anymore," he said before leaving. The next day, the sun timidly streamed through Samuel's bedroom window. I knocked softly on the door and entered. He was awake, his eyes red, his expression tired. I sat beside him in silence. There were no words enough to console that pain, but my presence was all I could offer. He didn't recoil. On the contrary, he laid his head on my lap, as he used to when he was little, and cried shamelessly. I ran my fingers through his hair, feeling each sob like a blade in my own chest. "I'm here," I whispered. And I was, for hours in silence. A silence that said everything. "I'm with you. I was also betrayed. And now all that's left for us is to rebuild. It was at that moment that I realized the pain had united us in a way Benjamin would never understand. We didn't talk about his father during breakfast. We just exchanged complicit glances, laden with sadness and relief. Sadness for the destruction. Relief for finally seeing the truth clearly. He was no longer the naive boy, and I was no longer the blind woman. We were two wounded beings trying to survive in the same minefield. And together it seemed less impossible. Samuel started helping me more around the house. He washed the dishes with me, made his own bed without me asking. Small gestures that said, "I'm here too, Mom." And thus we built a new kind of bond. One where pain was no longer silenced but embraced. He lay in my lap and cried like when he was little. Now we were two wounded hearts beating as one. I started sifting through our accounts with the calmness of someone searching for a ghost. It wasn't just the emotional betrayal that gnawed at me. There was something more. A distrust that grew with each unrecognized new bill. I had always left the financial part in Benjamin's hands. He said it was more practical that way, that I already had too much to worry about. And I foolishly agreed. I sat in front of the computer with a folder of old statements and scribbled notes. I cross-referenced values, dates, purchases. Some expenses matched. Others definitely did not. Names of companies I had never heard of, hotel reservations on dates when Benjamin claimed to be in meetings in another city. Short trips, indecipherable transfers, amounts that vanished without clear explanation. As I went on, I felt my blood boil. It wasn't just the marriage he was destroying. It was the security of our home, Samuel's future. The trust one had taken years to place. The worst wasn't the lie. It was the disregard for everything we built together. I, who saved on small things, saw there the trail of a man who acted as if our lives were chips in a dirty game. When I closed the spreadsheet, I knew. It was no longer about hurt. It was about justice. About recovering not just my worth as a woman, but my autonomy as a human being. And for the first time in a long time, I felt I had control again. The sums didn't add up. And he thought I was naive. I continued my investigation in silence, more and more meticulous. A specific statement caught my attention. Recurring transfers to an account linked to the name L. Mitchell. My stomach churned. I clicked on the history. There they were. Rent payments, purchases at luxury stores, travel expenses. All done with our money. My money. The money I saved by not buying books for myself, new clothes for Samuel, dinners out on weekends. He didn't just betray me with my best friend. He financed the betrayal with the sweat of my life. That wasn't just immoral, it was criminal. The entire facade of a responsible man crumbled. Benjamin wasn't just an emotional traitor. He was a cold manipulator, destroying his family with a bank card in his hand and a smile on his lips. I contacted the bank and requested detailed statements. Then I printed everything, organized it into folders, and put it inside a box that I hid at the back of my bedroom closet. I couldn't count on anyone else. Not yet. Those papers would be my weapon. Lauren had agreed to be an accomplice to a man who used her son, her home, and his wife as a shield. It was then that I understood. It wasn't enough to survive. I needed to fight. And to fight, I needed to prepare. He had undermined my life with lies. But now it was my turn to expose each of them to daylight. He financed the betrayal with the sweat of my life. I sought out Heather on Sunday afternoon. We met in a discreet park, away from the prying eyes of the neighborhood. She arrived with a serious expression, as if she knew what I had to say would be grave. I waited until we had privacy, and then I opened the folder with the evidence. I handed her the statements, the receipts, the papers that told a story as dirty as it was painful. She read in silence, line by line, with narrowed eyes. When she finished, she looked up and said, "This isn't just betrayal. This is theft." I nodded, feeling tears threaten to fall, but I didn't allow them. I had cried enough. Heather took a deep breath and said firmly, "You need a lawyer. A good one. Someone who knows exactly where to strike." I told her Benjamin never imagined I would be capable of moving on my own. He believed he had total control over me, and over the narrative. Heather smiled sideways bitterly and asked me, "Do you want justice or revenge?" I took a deep breath before answering. For the first time, without hesitation. "Both." She nodded. And there, in that exchange of complicit glances, A silent pact was born. We drove home in separate cars. I with my heart ablaze. Heather with a plan already forming. Her loyalty surprised me, but it was real. And at that moment it was all I needed not to completely collapse. "Do you want justice or revenge?" she asked. And I answered, "Both." It was time to bring Gregory to the board. Gregory received me in his office with the sobriety of someone who had seen many marital wars turn into legal battles. I brought the folder with the evidence, the same one I had hidden for weeks, and handed it to him without a word. He examined everything with surgical precision, noting, organizing, analyzing. When he finished, he took off his glasses, clasped his hands on the table and said, "You have more than evidence. You have a solid case." I took a deep breath, trying to process those words. Gregory then asked me to wait while he retrieved our marriage contract from the digital archive. Minutes later he returned with a different look. Sharper, more intense. "Danielle, do you remember a clause about infidelity in the prenuptial agreement?" I shook my head, surprised. I didn't remember. It was a document Benjamin himself made sure to handle. I just signed it. Gregory turned the monitor and pointed to the screen. "Here. It's clear. If infidelity is proven, the offending party automatically loses any financial rights to the assets accumulated during the union." My heart pounded. He continued, "And the evidence you brought is more than sufficient." I felt a chill. For the first time, the scales were starting to tip in my favor. "You have the legal right to protect them, yourself and Samuel. But you'll need courage for the next step." Gregory spoke firmly, but without haste. I nodded in silence. For the first time, justice was on the horizon. "With proven betrayal, he loses everything," he said. With Gregory's legal support, I began a new stage of my journey. Now it was no longer just emotion, it was strategy. Heather became my official ally. Together, we spent entire afternoons gathering screenshots, prints of conversations between Lauren and Benjamin, recordings of audios exchanged at suspicious times. Every detail mattered. Every piece of evidence was a brick laid against the fortress of lies they had built. Heather had access to more than I imagined. Old saved messages, call records, even conversations Lauren had confided in times past. She handed me everything with the coldness of someone who had long given up on her sister. And I absorbed it with a strength I didn't know I possessed. The pain was still there, but now it served a purpose. We organized everything into numbered folders. Gregory guided every move, every document category, every explanation needed to make the dossier irrefutable. The hardest part was rereading the conversations, seeing their complicity, the way they mocked my trust. But I needed to see. I needed to face the naked truth without veils, without pity. The pile of evidence grew day by day. When Gregory opened the last folder and analyzed the complete material, he simply nodded. "They have no way out of this." And I finally breathed, not relieved but determined. The time was coming. The time when the truth would cease to be a secret. The prints and audios were like daggers against them. In the following days, my focus was absolute. Gregory handled the legal side with the precision of a chess master. He articulated the next steps, drafted notifications, planned the best strategy to surprise them without room for defense. Meanwhile, I handled the harder part, emotionally preparing myself for the turnaround. I knew that by exposing everything there would be a storm, but I no longer feared the sound of the fall. I just wanted the truth. I started wearing clothes that made me feel strong again. I started walking early in the morning, breathing deeply, speaking less. Samuel noticed the change but didn't ask. He just observed me with silent respect, like someone watching their mother reborn from the ruins. Megan at work said my gaze had changed. "You're firmer, more alive." And she was right. Heather accompanied me to every meeting. We were two women rebuilt by pain, allied by circumstances we would never choose, but which now strengthened us. Each meeting with Gregory was a step toward the end, and toward a new beginning. A new contract with life was being drafted, this time on my own terms. In the last meeting of the week, Gregory closed his notebook and looked at me. "Now it's up to you." His words echoed inside me like a door opening. The plan was ready. The stage would soon be set. And I no longer trembled. Gregory smiled sideways. "Now it's up to you." And I was ready to turn the tables. Megan greeted me at her house with warm tea, open notebooks and eyes ready to listen. She said it was time to turn everything I was experiencing into words. You need to speak, Danielle. Not just for yourself but for others who still can't. I hesitated at first. Putting feelings into words meant reliving every pain, every humiliation. But she was right. And I knew it. I started slowly, like someone fumbling in the dark. I told her about the first suspicion, the toast, the sleepless nights, Samuel's look when everything came to light. Megan listened patiently, taking notes, highlighting parts that could touch hearts. As I spoke, I felt something in me reorganize itself. As if naming the pain made it smaller. As if verbalizing it was freeing. She encouraged me to construct a first-person narrative. My story, my pain, my rebirth. We rehearsed it as if it were a testimony, a text, or even a lecture. Each time I repeated it, I felt less shame and more strength. It was like building a structure with the words that once destroyed me. And for the first time I felt my voice had real value. When we finished, Megan held my hand firmly. This needs to reach other women. I nodded. My silence had an expiration date. And that date had finally passed. Every word was a brick in my reconstruction. I returned home with a notebook in my hands and a hurricane in my chest. I sat at the table, took a deep breath, and wrote the first paragraph. It wasn't a diary, nor an intimate outpouring. It was a manifesto. A text about being reborn after destruction. About finding dignity amidst the shattered pieces. I wrote as if I were speaking to the woman I once was, lost, ashamed, silent. Every line I wrote was a healing. The words flowed effortlessly, as if they had been waiting for this moment for months. I told the truth without names but with real emotions. I spoke of betrayal but also of self-knowledge. Of the pain of being invisible in your own life, and the power that arises when you decide to see yourself again. It was cathartic. Transformative. The text was direct, intense, full of painful pauses. And at the same time, it carried a hope that even I didn't know still existed within me. I reread everything, adjusted small details, and realized that it was no longer about Benjamin, nor about Lauren. It was about me. About what I could build from now on. About what I needed to give to the world. I ended with the sentence, every woman deserves to be her own heroine. And when I wrote the period, I felt that something inside me had changed forever. It was no longer about them. It was about me. The next morning, I gathered my courage and published the text on my social media. I didn't use catchy titles or hashtags. Just the raw text, accompanied by a simple caption. To those who feel alone, this is for you. I closed the app and went to take care of the house, trying to distract myself. But something told me that text wouldn't go unnoticed. And I was right. Notifications started timidly. Likes, supportive comments, direct messages. But within a few hours the volume grew. People sharing, tagging friends, saying, it feels like it was written by me. I went back to the post and saw hundreds of interactions. Then thousands. In less than 24 hours the number was unbelievable. People from all over the country. Women who cried, laughed, thanked. I was no longer alone. I went to school with my phone in hand, almost in shock. Megan greeted me with a tight hug and shining eyes. I told you your story had power. And she was right. My suffering, which was once a hidden burden, was now a bridge. A bridge between silenced voices and the courage to say enough. Something extraordinary had begun. I opened the app one more time. And there it was in large letters, 1 million views. I took a deep breath. The pain turned into words. And the words turned into an echo. The notification read, 1 million views. And I was no longer a betrayed woman. I was a heard woman. The invitation arrived on elegant paper, with the same golden imprint as the last New Year's Eve event. First I thought it was a cruel joke. But reading it carefully I realized it was real. The organization wanted me to speak about overcoming and resilience at the year-end closing. In the same hall where everything began. I hesitated. The memories were still fresh. But Megan told me, it's the comeback the world needs to see. I spent days thinking. I relived every moment of the night of betrayal. Every look, every false applause. But I also remembered the journey to get here, the pain, the evidence, the truth that came to light. Returning to that stage wouldn't be easy. But I was no longer the woman who left there in pieces. I was different, whole, and ready. I chose a red dress, strong like the blood that flows in the veins of those who have survived. As I entered the hall, I felt the air was different. Some people greeted me with respect. Others just watched in silence. Lauren and Benjamin, of course, weren't there. And they didn't need to be. That night wasn't about them. It was about me. I walked onto the stage with firm steps. The lights came on. And the microphone finally was mine. Going back there was facing the ghost with firm eyes. Good evening. I began, feeling my heart beat strong but steady. Exactly 1 year ago, in this very hall, a version of me was buried in front of everyone. Today, it is of her that I come to speak. And of the woman who was born in her place. The silence was absolute. People listened to me with attentive eyes, as if the pain I carried also resided in each of them. I spoke about what it means to be invisible within one's own home, about the mask society forces us to wear, and about the power that is born when we choose to stop pretending. Not all pain destroys. Some pains are fuel for rebirth. I told them about Megan, about Heather, about Samuel, about how much I needed to lose myself to find myself with truth. My speech had no hatred, but it had truth. It had no revenge, but it had justice. I looked at the women present and said, "You are not alone. You never were. And you never will be again." The words flowed with firmness, as if they had been kept for a long time waiting for this exact moment. It was more than a speech, it was an act of liberation. In the end, I took a deep breath and concluded, "No one else will tell my story for me." And that, in itself, is a victory. Every sentence was a shattered mirror being glued back together. When the audience was already preparing to applaud, I asked for one more minute. "Before I finish, I want to show you something." On the big screen, I projected images of the public denunciation, the screenshots, the audios, the evidence. But now not as a scandal, but as a symbol of what should not be tolerated in silence. This is not to expose. It is to warn. To say enough. The truth was spoken clear without euphemisms. The images were followed by a highlighted phrase. The shame was never mine. It was theirs. The entire hall remained silent for seconds that seemed eternal. And then, like a wave, the applause began. Standing up. With force. Some cried. Others just nodded. Everyone understood. I was no longer the betrayed woman. I was the woman who survived and chose to speak. Megan cried in the front row. Heather in the back smiled with full eyes. And Samuel, my son, filmed everything with open pride on his face. I descended from the stage without haste, feeling each step as a celebration of everything I had regained. I didn't need revenge. I only needed the truth. And it, in that instant, had more power than any wound. Applause, recognition, and most importantly, freedom. The entire hall fell silent, and then exploded in applause. Now, indeed, I toasted to the most incredible woman in my life, myself. A year later, I sat on the same bench where I used to cry in secret. But now I smiled. The New Beginning group had already welcomed dozens of women who, like me, were betrayed not only by partners but by their own expectations. There we shared pains but also victories. I saw women reconnect with their children, go back to school, restart businesses. Every story I heard was a wound being treated. Samuel transformed before my eyes. The silence that once enveloped him gave way to a serene maturity. He supported me in group meetings, read my drafts, listened to me patiently. And on one of those ordinary afternoons, seeing me comfort a crying participant, he approached and whispered in my ear, "I'm proud of you." It was the most healing phrase I had ever received. The repercussions of my online text reached a publisher, who invited me to turn my journey into a book. I spent months revisiting diaries, emails, memories, some painful, others strengthening. I wrote about falls and new beginnings, without romanticizing or softening anything. The book wasn't about revenge. It was about liberation. It was my story, but it was also the story of many. And it was time to be told with truth. On the morning I delivered the final manuscript, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I remembered the woman who trembled when silenced and the woman who now raised her voice firmly. Nothing silenced me anymore. No pain defined me. And this time, the one writing the end of the story was me. Now, I'm curious about you who listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever gone through something similar? Support the channel, subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. I'm leaving another story on the end screen that you'll also enjoy, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.